If you're hearing this, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't go near that cabin in the Appalachians. I know how it sounds. Like one of those campfire stories you laugh off while the embers crackle and the trees whisper around you. But this isn't a story. And if you don't take me seriously, you'll end up like me. Or worse. You've probably heard 100 tales about haunted cabins, backwoods shacks where hunters vanish, or places where strange lights flicker in the windows. This isn't one of them. This is worse. This is something no one should have found, something that should have been left to rot and fade into the dirt. When I close my eyes, I still see it. The porch slats, spattered with old stains that were too dark, too sticky, too wrong to be paint. The hollowed eyes of photographs nailed crooked on the wall inside. And in the woods beyond the cabin, something standing perfectly still between the trees, watching, waiting. I didn't know then what it was. I didn't even understand what I was looking at. But I felt it. The way you feel lightning before it strikes, or the way a dog pricks its ears before you even notice the thunder. And the worst part? I didn't go there by accident. I went on purpose. I told myself it was just a weekend getaway, a break from the city noise and the stress that had been eating me alive. I'd heard about an old cabin that people avoided, but that only made me want to find it more. Curiosity, boredom, stubbornness. It doesn't matter which excuse I use. All I know is I walked right into the trap, smiling like an idiot, thinking I was clever for finding something everyone else had forgotten. But it wasn't forgotten. It was waiting. If I told you everything I saw that first night, you wouldn't believe me. Honestly, I don't even believe it myself half the time. I've replayed it so many times in my head, trying to sort out what was real, what was hallucination, what was just fear twisting my senses. But there's one thing I can't rationalize away. Something followed me out of that place. I still hear it sometimes when the house is quiet. Scraping sounds, faint knocks on the window when no one's there. And if you're listening now, that means it knows you too. I'm going to tell you everything. Not because I think you'll understand, and not because I think it'll save me. I'm telling you because maybe, just maybe, it'll keep you from walking into those woods, from setting foot on that porch, from hearing your name whispered in the dark. So here's how it began. It started out as nothing more than a weekend trip to clear my head. When I set out for the Appalachians, I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was chasing quiet. My life had been reduced to an endless loop of noise. Work emails pinging at midnight. Neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Car horns bleeding through my window no matter the hour. I told myself a few days away in the woods would fix everything. Fresh air, solitude, maybe a chance to think without feeling like the world was pressing down on my chest. The drive in was almost too perfect. Rolling hills, fiery leaves drifting across winding roads, the occasional glimpse of smoke curling from a chimney in the distance. It had that postcard quality you see on travel blogs, the kind of beauty that makes you believe in escape. I remember thinking this is exactly what I needed. But if you've ever felt that uneasy twinge when things are going a little too well, you'll understand the chill that crept up my spine. The first oddity came in the form of a gas station. A squat little building leaning at an angle like it was slowly sinking into the ground. I stopped to top off my tank before heading deeper into the mountains. Inside, the place smelled like old wood and dust. The cashier, an older man with leathery skin and cloudy eyes, looked at me like I'd just crawled out of a grave. "Headin' far?" he asked. His voice cracked like dry twigs. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Rented a cabin out in the woods. Figured I'd get away for a bit." The air seemed to thicken. The two other customers in the store, both old men in overalls, froze mid-conversation. They weren't staring exactly, but the silence was heavy. Like every word they didn't speak was being shoved into my ears. The cashier's lips pressed into a thin line. "Cabin?" he repeated as if the word itself was wrong. "Yeah," I said again. "Little place off Route 7. Supposed to be about a mile down some dirt trail." The old man shook his head slowly, like I'd told him I planned on drinking bleach. "You don't want to be out there at night." I laughed, more to ease the tension than anything else. "Why bears?" "Coyotes?" He didn't answer. Neither did the other men. They just kept looking at me the way you'd look at someone balancing on the edge of a rooftop, too close to falling, but too stubborn to step back. I paid for the gas and a stale pack of crackers. As I left, I caught the faintest whisper between the two men at the back. I couldn't catch the words, but I knew the tone. Pity, warning, maybe even fear. By the time I reached the dirt road, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. The trail twisted and climbed in sharp angles, trees leaning over like skeletal arms reaching for my car. The GPS had long since lost signal. It was just me. The crunch of gravel beneath my tires, and the occasional flutter of something darting through the brush. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked harmless enough. Small, weather-beaten, with a porch that sagged slightly to the left. The windows were clouded with dust, but in that dim twilight glow, the place almost looked cozy. Almost. I hauled my bag inside and struck the light switch. Nothing. I'd been told there was a generator, so I lit a lantern I'd packed and set it on the counter. The glow spread across the room, illuminating peeling wallpaper, a stone fireplace, and a rocking chair that creaked faintly as if it had been waiting for me. I told myself it was charming, rustic, the kind of place you'd brag about surviving for a few nights. But something about it gnawed at me. The air smelled stale, as though the walls themselves hadn't breathed in years. And hanging above the fireplace was a photograph, sepia-toned, the faces of a family staring out blankly. Their eyes, though faded, seemed too sharp. Watching, I shook it off. Travel fatigue, nerves, imagination running wild. That's what I told myself. I made dinner from a can, sat by the fire, and listened to the woods settle into night. At first it was almost peaceful. The crackle of flames, the low hum of insects outside. Then slowly the quiet became too deep, too absolute, like the forest was holding its breath. I laughed it off, muttered something about needing sleep. But the words stuck in my throat because deep down, I already knew. That was the last time I felt safe. The first night in the cabin was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet evening. Me, a fire, and maybe a few chapters of some paperback I'd stuffed in my bag. Instead, it turned into the kind of night I can't stop replaying, no matter how hard I try. I remember setting up the lantern on the counter, its glow spilling out into the cabin's single room. Dust danced in the air, stirred by my footsteps as I unpacked. The walls were lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of forgotten trinkets. Mason jars filled with cloudy liquid, rusted tools, and an old clock that hadn't ticked in decades. It wasn't the kind of place designed for comfort. It felt like a space someone had walked away from in a hurry and never returned to. Still, I tried to make it mine. I tossed my bag on the couch, lit a fire in the fireplace, and cracked open a can of beer. The flames licked the logs, popping and hissing, their warmth pushing back the chill that seemed baked into the wood of the cabin itself. For a moment, I convinced myself I could enjoy it. The seclusion, the quiet, the kind of silent city people pay good money to find. But then I noticed the silence wasn't right. It wasn't the calm, gentle hush of the woods. It was heavy, pressing, the way a room feels after someone's been screaming inside it. The insects had gone quiet, the distant owls too. The fire snapped, but it sounded swallowed, like the air was refusing to carry the sound. I brushed it off. "You're tired, paranoid," I told myself. I picked up my book and tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. I kept glancing at the window, convinced something was moving outside. At first it was subtle. Shadows stretching across the glass as though a branch had swayed in the wind. Except there wasn't any wind. The trees outside were still as statues. Then came the sound. It started faint. A soft crunch like someone stepping carefully on gravel. My heart thudded as I sat up straight, listening. Another crunch, closer. The hairs on my arms prickled. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer nosing around the cabin. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the porch. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. The knock came again, slower this time, deliberate, as though whoever or whatever was out there knew I was listening. "Hello?" My voice cracked in the stillness. "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. I forced myself to the window and peered out. The porch was empty. The rocking chair swayed gently back and forth, though the air was perfectly still. My chest tightened as I stepped back, gripping the lantern so hard I thought it might shatter in my hands. Another sound. This one from the side of the cabin. Soft, dragging footsteps, something circling. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but then the floorboards creaked. Inside. I spun around, lantern light cutting through the cabin. The shelves, the fireplace, the couch, empty. Yet the air felt charged, thick with the weight of something unseen. "Get a grip," I muttered. My voice sounded small, pathetic. I decided to ignore it, to crawl into the bed tucked against the far wall. I pulled the thin blanket over me and listened to the fire crackle, trying to focus on anything but the stillness outside. I told myself it was just the woods playing tricks, my brain winding me up after that gas station conversation. Then, just as I started to drift, I heard it. A whisper. At first it was so soft I thought it was the wind. But no, it was a voice, low, hushed, dragging my name through the dark. I shot upright, heart hammering. The room was empty, but the voice came again, closer this time, pressed against the window. Name. I didn't answer. I couldn't, my throat was a knot. I squeezed my eyes shut and yanked the blanket over my head like I was a child again, hiding from the monster in the closet. The whisper faded, replaced by silence. Then footsteps retreating across the porch, each one slower than the last, until the night swallowed them whole. I lay there, wide-eyed, shaking, until exhaustion finally dragged me into sleep. Looking back, I should have left that night. Packed my bag, walked until I hit a road, begged someone to take me anywhere else. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was nothing. A nightmare stitched out of fatigue and paranoia. I thought that was the worst it would get. I was wrong. Morning came slow, like the sun was reluctant to touch that cabin. I woke to the sound of silence, not birdsong, not the chatter of squirrels, nothing. just the faint hiss of last night's fire dying into ash. For a moment I lay there staring at the ceiling, convincing myself I'd imagined the knocks, the whispers, the footsteps. But when I sat up, I noticed something that made my stomach knot. On the inside of the window, my window, were fingerprints. Smudged, greasy, unmistakable. They weren't mine. I didn't linger. I threw on my jacket, stepped outside, and let the cold morning air bite into me. The forest seemed friendlier in daylight. Ordinary even. Shafts of sun cut through the trees. Birds finally daring to sing again. It was almost enough to convince me I'd overreacted. Almost. I decided to explore, to clear my head. Maybe if I understood the area, I'd stop jumping at shadows. The trail behind the cabin led deeper into the woods, winding past mossy stumps and fallen branches. After a while, I noticed carvings in the trees. At first, I thought they were initials, the kind teenagers etch into bark. But these weren't hearts and letters. They were symbols. Circles intersecting with jagged lines, shapes that seemed to shift if I stared too long. Some were so deep they looked like the trees had been cut to the bone. The further I walked, the more I found, not just on trees but on rocks. Even the cabin's wooden fence posts. Whoever or whatever had carved them had been thorough. Then I stumbled on the first real discovery. Half buried under leaves was a small leather-bound book. I brushed the dirt off and flipped it open. The pages were warped, the ink smeared, but I could still make out the handwriting. Jagged, uneven. Words written in a rush, sometimes repeated over and over. Don't answer the knocks. Don't look in the window. Don't speak your name. I skimmed further, heart pounding. The entries described nights in the cabin much like mine. Knocks on the door. Voices in the dark, shadows that didn't belong. Then the words trailed into nonsense. Strings of letters, scratched out sentences. Whole pages blackened with ink. The final entry was just 3 words, scrawled so hard the paper tore. It knows me. I shoved the journal into my bag and turned back, moving faster now. But the woods didn't look the same. The path seemed longer, the trees closer together. For a few terrible minutes I thought I'd gotten lost. Then at last the cabin emerged through the trees. Back inside, I tried to shake it off. I cooked a meager breakfast on the portable stove. Told myself the journal was just the ramblings of some paranoid hiker. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Later, I drove into the nearest town. A small, crumbling place with 1 diner, a few shuttered shops, and the same gas station I'd stopped at before. I thought maybe I could ask around, get some history on the cabin. The waitress at the diner was friendly enough, until I mentioned where I was staying. Her smile froze. "You're at that cabin?" I nodded, feeling foolish. "Yeah, old place out on Route 7. Her eyes darted to the other customers. A man at the counter set down his coffee with a clatter. A couple in the corner went silent. "You shouldn't stay there," she whispered. "Not if you want to come back." I asked what she meant, but she shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Just leave, while you can." On my way out, a man in a faded hunting jacket stopped me on the sidewalk. His face was weathered, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You're in the cabin," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I admitted. "What's the deal with it?" "Everyone acts like—" He grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "It ain't the cabin. It's what comes with it." Before I could ask what he meant, he released me and walked away, shoulders hunched, muttering under his breath. I drove back shaken, the road twisting through trees that suddenly felt less like shelter and more like bars of a cage. Back in the cabin, I pulled out the journal again, studying the jagged handwriting. Rules, warnings, things that lined up with what I'd already experienced. Don't answer the knocks. Don't look in the window. Don't speak your name. The thought hit me like a fist in the chest. The voice outside had known my name, and if the journal was right, I had already broken one of the rules. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, I couldn't sit still. The woods pressed in from every side, the cabin groaning with every shift of the wind. I lit the lantern and stared at the shadows stretching across the walls. That's when I understood. The rules weren't superstitions. They weren't folklore. They were instructions, and soon I'd find out exactly what happened when you ignored them. By the second night, the rules stopped feeling like ramblings in a forgotten journal and started feeling like a set of commandments, merciless, non-negotiable, carved into the fabric of the place itself. The sun had barely dipped beyond the tree line when the air inside the cabin shifted. It was subtle at first, a heaviness that pressed down on my chest like the atmosphere itself was growing denser. The lantern hissed faintly as though the flame inside were struggling to breathe. I told myself I'd follow the journal's warnings. I wouldn't answer knocks. I wouldn't look through the windows. I wouldn't speak my name no matter what I heard. But rules are easy to believe in when nothing's testing you. It's different when the night begins pressing its weight against your walls. The first knock came at 3:07 a.m. 3 sharp raps just like the night before, but louder, more deliberate. The sound cut through my bones. I lay frozen in bed, eyes locked on the ceiling, breath held tight in my chest. Then came another set of knocks, slower, spaced apart like whoever was outside wanted me to feel every second between them. My instincts screamed at me to call out, to demand who was there, to prove to myself it was nothing. But I remembered the journal. Don't answer the knocks. So I stayed quiet. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear the old wood groaning under weight, as if something or someone was pacing across the porch. A dragging sound followed, nails or claws scratching along the wall as it circled the cabin. Then it spoke. Not in words at first. It was a hum, low, tuneless, vibrating against the glass panes of the window. Then, like static resolving into speech, the humming became words. It was my voice, let me in. I sat up straight, stomach twisting. The words were exact, not just the tone, but the inflection, the casual rhythm I used without thinking. Hearing myself from outside the cabin felt like watching a reflection move before I did. I clamped a hand over my mouth. If I said anything, I knew it would answer. And the one thing the journal made clear was this: never give it your name. The humming voice faded into whispers. My name this time, over and over, soft as a lullaby. Name, name. I pressed the pillow over my ears, but the sound burrowed in anyway, crawling down my spine. At some point I fell into a restless half-sleep. I woke to the creak of the rocking chair on the porch. Slow, back and forth. Back and forth. The kind of rhythm you can't ignore once you hear it. I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself one glance wouldn't hurt. Just one. I pulled the curtain back an inch, and I wished to God I hadn't. There was something sitting in the chair. At first it looked human. Slouched, thin, head tilted as though listening. But the proportions were wrong. Too long in the limbs, too sharp in the joints. The head turned slowly until it was facing the window. Facing me, I didn't see its eyes, not really. What I saw instead was an absence. A void so complete, it felt like staring into the hole between stars. My reflection warped in that void, my face stretching and twisting, smiling when I wasn't. I staggered back, curtain snapping shut. My pulse hammered so loud I thought it might shake the cabin apart. I scrambled for the journal, desperate, flipping through pages I'd already read. That's when I found the line I'd missed. Never look outside after midnight. The rules weren't just survival tips. They were traps, tests. Break one and you invited it closer. The knocks came again, harder this time. The voice outside wasn't mine anymore. It was dozens of voices layered together. Male, female, old. And all of them saying the same thing. Open the door. I backed into the corner. Lantern shaking in my grip. The scratching returned. This time against the window frame, dragging lines into the wood. The shadows inside the cabin stretched, too tall, too thin, bending at impossible angles. For a second I thought the lantern's flame was flickering. Then I realized the darkness was moving on its own. It reached for me. I hurled the journal at the shadow. The book thudded against the floor, its pages fluttering open. The whispers stopped. The shadows froze. And then, as if pulled back by invisible strings, they snapped away, retreating into the walls. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the corner with the lantern until dawn, shaking, waiting for the sun to burn away the weight of the night. But morning didn't bring peace. The porch bore new scratches, deep gouges in the wood where claws, or fingers, had dragged themselves back into the trees, and scrawled into the dirt below the window were words that hadn't been there before. I saw you. That was when I realized the journal hadn't been a warning. It had been a record. A set of instructions left behind by someone else who'd made the same mistakes I had. And if the final page was right, Fight knows me was more than paranoia. Then leaving wasn't an option anymore. Dawn should have felt like freedom, but instead it felt like a trap with better lighting. I opened the cabin door slowly, expecting the forest to smell of wet earth and pine. Instead, the air hit me like the inside of an abandoned crypt. Stale, heavy, and wrong. The woods didn't look the same as yesterday. The trees were closer, leaning inward like eavesdropping giants. Their trunks were darker now, almost black, and their bark seemed to ripple when I stared too long. A low mist snaked along the ground, curling around my boots as if tasting me. I told myself it was just exhaustion, paranoia, a trick of the light. But the path I'd hiked in on was gone. Where there had been a trail of crushed leaves and boot prints, there was now nothing but a tangle of roots and brambles. I spun in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, endless fog, and no sign of escape. That was when I remembered the last line of the journal. If it knows you, you're already part of the woods. I didn't want to believe it. I stuffed the journal into my backpack and set off anyway, forcing my legs to move, stepping over twisted roots and ducking under branches. For a while I thought I was making progress. At least I was moving. But after maybe 15 minutes, my stomach went cold. I was back at the cabin, same porch, same claw marks, same rocking chair still swaying slightly even though the morning air was dead calm. No, I whispered. My voice cracked. No, I tried again. Picked a direction, any direction, and ran until my lungs burned. The forest blurred into a green-gray smear. My boots caught on a root and I pitched forward, palms scraping against damp earth. When I looked up, the cabin again. This time the door was open. I hadn't left it that way. The inside of the cabin looked darker than it should, like a black hole had swallowed the room. The edges of the doorway shimmered, bending the light. The journal throbbed in my backpack like a living heart. I backed away slowly. A voice drifted out from the doorway. My own voice again. "You can't leave." I bolted into the trees, not caring which direction, just away from that voice. Branches clawed at my face, tore my shirt. The fog grew thicker, swallowing the world down to a few feet of visibility. I started to hear footsteps behind me. At first faint, then louder, crunching in perfect time with mine. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I took one step backward. A step echoed back at me from the fog. I wanted to scream but held it in, my breath coming out in shuddering gasps. I reached into my pack and pulled out the journal, flipping it open with shaking fingers. Most of the pages were blank now. The writing had vanished, leaving only one line etched deep into the paper like it had been burned there. "The woods don't move." "You do." I dropped the book like it had bitten me. The words swam in my head. What did that even mean? I started walking again, slower this time, turning in place every few steps. The forest felt like a maze built by something that didn't understand humans. A labyrinth of repeating trees and endless fog. Then ahead of me, I saw movement, a figure standing just beyond the mist. At first I thought it was a hiker. A man maybe, tall and thin, wearing a dark hood. Relief flooded me. I called out, "Hey! Over here!" The figure didn't move. I stepped closer. "I'm lost." "Please." The figure raised its head. It had my face, not a mask. Not a doppelganger in the storybook sense. It was me. Exactly me, down to the tear in my shirt, the mud on my boots. Its expression was blank, but its eyes were two pits of roiling darkness. It lifted its hand and pointed at me. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out, at least not at first. Then a low, wet gurgle poured out, like water rushing through a clogged drain. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back. It stepped forward, and the forest behind it shifted. Trees bent inward as if making way for it. The mist thickened, curling around its legs like obedient dogs. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours, days, it blurred into one endless nightmare. My throat was raw, my legs leaden. Every time I slowed, I felt it behind me, closing the distance. Then I saw it, the cabin again. Waiting like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. The door swung wider. I fell to my knees, sobbing, dirt grinding into my palms. I couldn't escape. Every path led back here. The woods weren't a place anymore. They were a loop. A trap. The journal lay on the porch, open to a new page. The words scrawled across it were fresh, still glistening as though written in something wet. "You're next." I backed away, trembling, until my back hit the trees. The cabin loomed before me, and in the window I saw my reflection. Except it wasn't reflecting me anymore. It was smiling, and then it raised a hand and beckoned. I turned to run again, but the trees had closed in completely, their branches weaving together like bars. The fog rose higher, swallowing my knees, my waist, my chest. My breaths came out ragged, and every exhale formed shapes, silhouettes, faces. I screamed into the mist, but the sound didn't echo. It just vanished, somewhere behind me. My own voice whispered, "You can't leave." I spun, heart hammering, no one there. When I turned back, the cabin door was shut again, but the journal was gone. By the time the 7th night came, I'd stopped pretending this was just fear or exhaustion. Something in those woods wanted me, and the cabin was its snare. The looping trails, the vanishing paths, the whispers that wore my own voice like a mask. They weren't random. They were orchestrated. I sat on the floor of the cabin, lantern sputtering, journal clutched in my hands. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled with writing I didn't recognize. Lines and sketches I hadn't seen before. Rough drawings of the cabin. Circles around the woods. Strange stick figures kneeling before a tall shape with limbs that bent like broken antlers. The words beneath the drawings chilled me. It feeds on names. It feeds on memory. Feeds on us. I thought about the warnings. Don't answer the knocks. Don't look outside. Don't speak your name. All of it was about denying it recognition. As long as you didn't give it yourself willingly. Maybe you could last. But then I saw another line, scrawled so violently the paper tore. It always gets in. The lantern flickered out, darkness swallowed the room whole, pressing against my eyes. I scrambled for matches, but before I could strike one, I heard it. The creak of the rocking chair, slow, deliberate, back and forth. Then came the knock. Not 3 raps this time. Just one, loud, final. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the journal like a weapon, though I knew it was useless. The voice came next. At first, it was my mother's voice. Warm, familiar, pleading. "Sweetheart, open the door." "You don't have to be afraid." I knew it wasn't her. My mother was 3 states away. Still, my chest ached hearing it, like claws dragging through old memories. The voice shifted. A friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Then my own voice again, louder, angrier. "Let me in." I pressed my hands over my ears. The voices layered, multiplying, each one calling my name, demanding it. And then the door opened. I didn't move it. The handle turned on its own, creaking as the door swung wide. The shadows in the doorway bent and stretched, knitting themselves into a shape that wasn't human, but wanted me to think it was. It had arms too long and thin, fingers that scraped the floorboards. Its head brushed the ceiling beams, tilting as it ducked into the room. Where its face should have been was nothing but a shifting void. I couldn't look directly at it. My eyes watered, my vision swam. The air grew heavy, each breath slicing into my lungs. The journal slid from my hands. Pages fluttered open to the same scrawled words, glowing faintly as though lit from within. It feeds on names. The thing crouched closer. Its limbs bent wrong, its body folding like paper. From the void of its face, a sound emerged. Hundreds of voices layered into one. Say it, it wanted my name. That was the trade. Recognition for survival. But I knew what the journal had meant. Once you gave it your name, you weren't you anymore. You were its. I shook my head, backing into the corner. My voice cracked as I whispered, "No." The shadows surged forward, stretching across the floor, reaching for me. Fingers of darkness clawed up my legs, cold and sharp as ice. I kicked, thrashed, but they tightened, pinning me in place. "Say it!" The voices roared, rattling the walls. The cabin shook, dust raining from the rafters. In desperation, I snatched the journal from the floor and tore a page free. I bit into the paper, ripping it in half, then shouted, "You don't get me!" For a moment, everything froze. The shadows quivered. The voices stopped. The void face tilted, studying me. Then it laughed, a sound like splitting wood and breaking bones. "You already gave it," it whispered. My blood ran cold. The first night, the voice outside had spoken my name, and I hadn't denied it. I hadn't protected it. That's when it had gotten in. The shadows surged again, wrapping around my arms, my throat. My vision dimmed as the cold seeped into me, hollowing me out. But then something shifted. From the torn pages of the journal, light spilled out. Not bright, not pure, just enough to push the shadows back a fraction. The entity recoiled, shrieking in 100 voices. I scrambled to tear out more pages, scattering them across the floor. Each scrap glowed faintly, forming a barrier between me and the thing. The cabin filled with its furious wails as it slammed against the invisible circle, clawing and thrashing. The walls groaned, the floor split, the windows shattered inward, but the circle held. For hours, minutes, seconds, I don't know how long. I crouched there inside that fragile shield, clutching the last intact page of the journal. My heart pounded like a war drum, every beat screaming that I wouldn't last. Then, as the first hint of dawn touched the trees outside, the shadows withdrew. The entity unspooled itself, retreating through the door, dissolving into the mist. The rocking chair creaked once, twice, and fell still. I was alive. For now. But as I stared at the ruined journal, pages glowing faintly before burning to ash, I realized the truth. I hadn't defeated it. I'd only bought time, and it was still out there waiting. I made it out of that cabin. You probably want to know how, and the truth is I don't even know. I remember the circle of torn journal pages glowing faintly, the entity shrieking in rage as dawn broke, the shadows pulling back into the trees. The air grew lighter, easier to breathe, and when I stumbled outside, the mist seemed to peel away just enough to show me the road. I walked for hours, maybe days. It's all a blur. At some point, a car appeared on the dirt road, an old pickup that nearly ran me over as I stumbled into its path. The driver, a farmer with kind eyes and calloused hands, asked me where I'd come from. I tried to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. I told him I'd been hiking, got lost, barely made it out. He drove me to the nearest town, dropped me off at the sheriff's office. I thought about telling them everything, but how do you? There's a cabin in the woods that eats names and makes shadows move. You can't file a report for that, so I lied. I said I'd gotten lost on the trails, spent a couple nights sheltering in a rundown shack. The sheriff nodded, unimpressed, and gave me a tired lecture about sticking to marked paths. I left town the same day, didn't look back. But here's the thing. Leaving the cabin didn't end it. The first night back home, in the safety of my apartment, I almost convinced myself it had been some waking nightmare. Stress, paranoia, maybe even hallucinations. I locked the door, poured myself a drink, and collapsed on the couch. For a few hours I slept like the dead, until the knocking started. 3 raps. Deliberate. On the window of my third-floor apartment, I froze, pulse thundering in my ears. Slowly, against every screaming instinct, I turned my head. The curtains swayed slightly, as if someone had just let go of them. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. It's been weeks since then, and the signs keep piling up. Shadows stretching too far in the corners of my room. Whispers through my phone when no call is connected. Emails with no sender, no subject, only my name repeated over and over until the text box cuts off. And the worst part, the mirrors. Sometimes, when I look at my reflection, it doesn't look back right away. I'm telling you all this because I don't think I have much time left. Whatever that thing is, it followed me. Or maybe it was never bound to the cabin at all. Maybe the cabin is just bait. A lure to get people to walk willingly into its grasp. Maybe it's the woods themselves or something older that lives under them. I keep thinking about what the hunter in town said. It ain't the cabin. It's what comes with it. He was right, and now it's with me. I know how this sounds. If you've never felt it, never heard your own voice calling from the dark, It probably sounds like I've lost my mind. But if you've ever stayed near that stretch of woods, if you've ever even thought about finding that cabin, deep down, so here's my warning. Don't go looking for it. Don't follow the stories. Don't try to prove you're braver than the locals, smarter than the ones who vanish. Curiosity is the hook, and your name is the bait. Because once it knows you, once it really knows you, it doesn't let go. I can't give you a solution. The journal is gone, burned to ash. Whatever protection its words offered, they died in that cabin. All I have left is this, the hope that telling you might be enough to spread the weight, to buy me a little more time. Maybe if you're listening, if you're thinking about me right now, it'll turn its attention toward you instead. Maybe it'll knock on your window tonight, whisper your name, and leave me in peace for just a little while longer. Or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't share. If you're still here, if you've listened this far, I have to ask you something. Tell me I'm not alone. Leave a comment, share your theories, tell me if you've ever heard about that cabin, that part of the Appalachians. Maybe you've stayed there. Maybe you know the rules better than I did. Maybe you've seen the symbols carved into the trees, the shadows moving in places shadows shouldn't be. If you have, tell me. Please. Because I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just me, that it's been doing this for decades, maybe centuries, that I was only the latest in a long line of names it's collecting. Sometimes I wonder if that's why the locals never warned me properly. They didn't stop me, but they didn't lie either. Maybe they knew. Maybe the only way to live with it is to let it feed on outsiders. People dumb enough to go searching, sacrifices, offerings. If that's true, then I was always doomed the moment I set foot on that dirt road. But if there's even a chance someone else out there has beaten it, if you found a way to silence the knocks, to close the door for good, I need to know. Until then, I'll keep fighting it the only way I can, by remembering who I am, by refusing to say my name out loud in the dark, by writing this down, forcing the story into words before it consumes me entirely. I used to think names were just sounds, just labels. Now I know better. Names are power, and once something takes yours, it owns you. So if you're listening, remember this. If you ever hear a knock at night, don't answer. If you hear your name whispered outside, don't respond. If you see a shadow in the window that looks like you, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't go near that cabin. If you're hearing this, it's already too late.